The Traitor's Blade by Sebastian de Castel. I have problems with this book, but I still think it's good. The prose is nice, especially for a debut book. I think it's pretty well done. I think the humor can really work a lot of the time. I think the dynamic set up between the three Greatcoats right off the bat is really good. Like, Falkio is this classical, honorable musketeer. There's the like comedy relief kind of guy who's also a ladies' man, and then like their super stoic knight who's really good with the sword. I think when they're around each other, it works really well, and they bounce off each other really naturally. I think the fighting a lot of the time can be super entertaining. Like, they have swords, they have bow and arrows, they have rapiers. You can't go very wrong with that. Like, there's a bit where they have to fight and like they roll up their sleeves and they have like little bone shards in their cuffs, so they like can block shit with their cuffs and then punch also, which is just very cool conceptually. They do goofy stuff where like mid-combat Falkio will lay out a certain kind of cool parry just to do like one parry, one move, such as like stepping on the blade like in that game Sekiro to parry. And there's like bits where they're fighting with their blades, and that's like a form of conversation. They're like somehow talking to each other with each stroke. I like the lore a lot. There's kind of this flashback structural device where probably every 2 chapters is a flashback to the events that, preceded this whole book. Like 5 years, the huge event that happened 5 years before this. And it's slowly revealing stuff about the present day that kind of fleshes the story out and makes it feel whole. And I think Falkio is a pretty good character a lot of the time. He's hot-headed, but he's a straight edge, so it's entertaining to see him kind of balance that. He has a very traumatic past, and he struggles with PTSD, as we see in the flashbacks. So it's really interesting to see him kind of try to keep to these super strict guidelines while also like getting, seeing shit that reminds him of his past, and he's like loses his cool. And at the start, that's an interesting balance to be had, and it's entertaining to read. Though, that's kind of where my problems begin, is with Falkio. He is kind of inconsistent. He is straight edge a lot of the time, but then he just kind of says, fuck that, and is just not straight edge. I could see that working for a lot of characters, like they say they're straight edge, but they're not actually straight edge, so they lack that self-awareness, and that's, kind of dramatic irony a little bit. But here it really feels like the writer still thinks that Falkio's straight edge, and I don't think he is at all. Like, there's a few bits where he says, like, killing is a last resort, and then he very, very often will maliciously think about killing somebody. Like, he doesn't want to kill, like, the main princess character at the start of this book, and that's kind of what causes a lot of the drama. But then he's like, he'll see other people and be like, I am waiting to kill them fucking as fast as I can. And he does kill, still. He does kill often when it's unnecessary. Like, there's this whole thing about him being, like, contractually obligated to work for this princess, and he kind of just bounces, and there is like an in-text reason that he's allowed to just bounce out of his contract to hang out in the city the whole time. But I don't know, it really felt it felt like he had all these strict rules, and the writer was constantly thinking of ways for him not to go with those rules as a means of keeping the story going. It's like he had these guidelines for writing the book, like the guidelines were Falkio's morals, but it was like, shit, it's really hard to write a story with a guy that acts like this, so there's constantly people being like, you don't actually have to do that. You don't actually have to stay with me because I give you permission to not. And he's like, okay. This inconsistency with his character branches into a larger problem, into my largest problem with this entire book. It kind of feels like the author wrote the story without outline, which is fine. But then he kind of, without rewriting much, just added the glue. Like, the Greatcoats are kind of just bumbling around for the first fourth of the book, and then they're just assigned to this random job, and it felt very aimless because of that. Like, we see that they're this lost, like, group of people who are warriors, and they're adjudicators. They do have something to do. They're trying to find something for the dead king, and we know that the other, like, that's Falkio's mission, and we know that the other two have a mission that they can't tell him. And we also know that the king didn't tell him what he's actually looking for. So it's like explicitly aimless. And then they just are assigned to this random job. And you're like, okay. And then there's this whole separate plot that it has to do with this job. And you're like, right. But, how does this fit in with the overarching narrative? It's just kind of they just coincidentally ended up here. And that's kind of what ends up being unsatisfying about it, is that it does have to do with the whole overarching narrative. It's not a coincidence. It's somehow a few, like 3 separate people were pulling the strings and tugging them into go to this specific job and stay for during this specific like purge event where it was super dangerous, and Falcio had in all likelihood would not make it out, and like people had these motives that were inconsistent. Like this one guy wanted to bring the Greatcoats along for this job because he wanted people who were loyal to the king to be around just in case the one of the characters that were also there went crazy. But it's like, why the Greatcoats wanted to kill this crazy person the whole time, but this other guy who hired them on or baited them to be hired on didn't let them. So it was just kind of like, it felt like the story and the like plot caused the motives and character drives rather than the other way around. Like Falcio had all these really strict motives, but the story changed those. It wasn't like, fuck this, I'm doing this because of this, and that changed the story. I mean, that is kind of what happened, but he said, fuck this, I want to protect this girl, because that, that's my morals, but that's inconsistent with other morals, such as continuing to serve the mistress who he was assigned to protect. As I said, this whole mission that seemed like a side quest ends up being super important to, like, what the overarching goals are, and it felt weird because it was just random. Like, they just happened to go here. It wasn't like it wasn't like we're going here searching for this thing and we found it. It's like we're aimlessly searching for this thing, are sent to a city, and that thing happened to be there. Like, within like the last few chapters, we're learning about all this crazy lore and motives, all super fast, just thrown in your face, and it's essentially like justifying the side quests that Falcio went on. There were multiple times in this book where I was just like pulled a face. I was like, what? And there's other times where I think, like, to the author's credit, I think he did a pretty good job of tying, like, these seemingly unconnected events together. I just think that the book needed some serious developmental editing. I feel like no one was around to tell him, like, hey, I think this stuff can work, but it needs more justification. I don't buy that this just happens because certain people somehow manipulated the Greatcoats into doing this shit. More would have helped. It's rare that I think a book is too short, but I do think this one is like 20,000 words too short. I think we could have used a few more flashbacks. I think we could have rewritten some motives, or like written it so it more naturally changed motives to make the plot go forward. As it stands, it kind of feels like a hastily built log cabin, right? Like, if you look at it from afar, it looks like a very nice story that's well laid out. But if you kind of look closely and think about it from the writer's perspective, like how he wrote this down, it really, you can see the gaps between the logs. You can see the shoddy structure that's beneath it all. And I don't think I'm going to continue this series. People watch this, let me know in the comments if you think it gets objectively better, but all the ratings are pretty much exactly the same for all 4 books. So I think I'm going to move on for now, unless someone really convinces me that the next few are better than this one. People also told me this was swashbuckling fantasy. It is not. There's no swash, not even a buckle in sight. It's not swashbuckling. It's like not buckling at all. There's no buckle, no swash. This is a swash or buckle. It's 6.0.